Today we'll be tying a small baitfish pattern, in this case attempting to trick some albies in the northeast coast. We'll be tying this pattern on the SW004 hook. Lay down a base of thread in the middle of your hook shank. Leave gaps at both the bend and behind the eye. Over that thread, lay down a bit of weighted wire. This is going to allow the fly to get just under the surface of the water as soon as the fly hits. Now, wrap your thread back over that lead wire to create a smooth working area. In order to keep my thread where I want as far as a starting point, I'm just going to add a couple wraps of either a whip finish or a half hitch to lock my thread in place. You're going to use a material like the EP Game Changer blend or even 3D fibers or whatever your preferred fiber material is to create the body of this fly. Since these fibers don't compress the same way a natural material like deer hair would, you want to make sure to use a heavier thread so that you can lay down nice tight wraps to hold the material in place. Also, make sure to use less material than you think you should so that you don't overcrowd the entire pattern. Sparse here is key, so even if you've grabbed a clump like this, remove some of the materials just to ensure that you stay nice and sparse. Also, tie it longer than you need to in the beginning, as you can always trim it away, but you can't add it once you've completed the pattern. Lay your material on top of the hook and allow it to wrap around the shank. Then, lay down a couple of tight wraps and then bring your material back around it and lock it down. Using this reverse tying technique, you can start tying in your materials further forward, as at the end, you're going to end up wrapping back over them. Tie in these sparse clumps of material several more times, tying them in on top, wrapping them around, and then reverse tying in the tips. As you can see here, the translucent nature of the material, and since you're tying it in sparsely, allows your thread to show through. So consider that when you choose your thread color, as it'll end up being an accent for the main body of the fly. With the main body color, I like to tie in the final clump underneath the fly, as working in this manner often leads to most of your materials sitting on top. Now here, I'm going to tie in an accent color over the back of the fly. Make sure that that material is slightly longer than the tailing material of your fly, or the final length you're going to trim it. Rather than letting this slide down and around, keep it right at the top of the fly. Then, as you've done with the other materials, bring that material back and tie it in the same way. The final material to be tied in are a couple strands of lateral scale. You can use the larger lateral scale as a single strand, but here I'm working with a couple strands of the smaller lateral scale. Tie it in so that it forms a single strip down the side of your baitfish. Once you've locked it in on one side, bring it to the other side and repeat the process. Now, whip finish and trim your thread free. In this case, I'm just using a set of epoxy eyes, which I'm going to attach using a thick UV resin. I'm going to build this UV resin on in stages so that it allows me to shape the head of the fly. Ensure that your eyes are symmetrical so that the fly doesn't spin or track strangely through the water, and make sure that you've drawn your materials back so that it sets them in the proper position when you start to cure this resin. Continue to add resin to build up a smooth profile to the head. I want a slim profile this particular pattern, so I'm going to pull back firmly every time I'm curing that UV resin. Here, I'm going to brush my materials back and then trim them down to the proper size of the fly, as currently I've tied the fly much longer than I want it to end up. As you trim a profile of the fly, just be careful that you don't trim off your lateral scale. You want that material to remain one of the longest materials in the fly. To prevent accidentally trimming my lateral scale, I'll pull it forward as I trim the fly to shape. This step is much easier outside the vise, so I'm going to do a bit of trimming and then return to the vise. Continue to brush back and preen the fibers as you trim the fly. This will ensure that none of them spring forward or end up tangling up on each other. Once you've trimmed the fly to the shape you prefer, preen the lateral scale material backward and trim it to length. Don't let this trimming process take forever, as it easily can, as you notice each individual fiber not being exactly how you'd like. Remember that once you put this fly in the water, it's going to streamline the fly much more and make it look far more realistic.